Greetings, travelers. Welcome to the Mid-Nite Drive-Thru. This is Jim, and a little story I like to call Ghandi Ivy. Sorry, what? Oh, I didn't see you there. No, I was just sort of sitting here and talking to myself. I do that a lot these days. Once, not so long ago, that sort of thing would have been a surefire way to get one fitted for a stylish jacket whose sleeves button in the back. But I've seen articles debunking that philosophy and claiming that folks who talk to themselves are among our best and brightest, so I'm probably safe for the present. Of course, those articles are total bollocks. You know that, right? Honestly. If you see a person walking through the park, gesticulating wildly and shouting, despite the fact that there is very clearly no one to whom they are conversing in the immediate vicinity, your perimeter alarms should be sounding. You switch to the other side to confirm that no, there's no Bluetooth earpiece over here either. That accomplished, you should be making the necessary course corrections to maximize the distance between the two of you. Such people are inherently unstable, and you don't want to be the closest piece of meat within grasping distance should the precariously stacked mountain of crystal goblets and china plates which constitute this person's carefully crafted veneer of sanity come crashing down. Believe me. What's that? Why, yes, that is mine. I must have dropped it. Silly me, I'm always losing things. I'd leave this head of mine somewhere if it wasn't attached. Yes, it's been in the family for generations. I'd hate to lose this. Thank you. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. What I was going to say is that instability is not currently understood by practitioners of the mental health profession to be a communicable disease. This is because most of the people who choose such a profession were inspired to this calling after long periods spent during adolescence peering through thick Coke bottle lenses at butterflies pinned to cardboard or wooden surfaces painted in dull primary colors, or something equally soul-suffocating. These people do not consider themselves, hilariously, susceptible to the same megrims as might afflict such lesser folk as you or I. They imagine the inner workings of their own minds as having much more in common with the innards of an expensive Swiss wristwatch than with the chaotic dumpsters of motive and memory which they imagine to lurk inside the brains of those they purport to treat. In short, they do not believe such conditions to be communicable because they believe they are immune. They do not believe they can catch their patients crazy because they fancy themselves superior. They're fools. I used to be one of them. I know better now. I used to work in a treatment facility. The name of the place isn't important. My title and position are equally irrelevant. The things I was taught to gain the credentials that qualified me for that position were once among the greatest treasures in my mental hoard. No longer. Another treasure, one which has not lost its value to me, was being able to come to this park during my lunch hour. I like to bring my own lunches. The fare in the staff cafeteria was atrocious, and the time wasted standing in the queue was less than I could spend in the sunshine. So I would bring my meal out here and sit on one of the low stone walls that surround the landscaping. And in the warm rays of the sun, I could literally feel myself recharging as the stress of the outside world seemed to just flow out of me into the cool stone. There was a large orange cat that must have either had a home nearby or else managed to convince many of the park's patrons to part with snacks, for he seemed plump and well-fed. I say he, although at the time I knew little of feline biology and couldn't see anything from a distance which could confirm this opinion. It just seemed to have a male personality to me. And so when I first began to try to talk to him, to coax him to share a piece of that day's sandwich, I dubbed him Tommy. I recall I had brought roast beef that day, and it was clear I had made a friend as he purred loudly while gnawing the bits of meat I tossed to him. In the couple weeks that followed, Tommy was waiting for me each day at the same spot. Each day he ventured closer and closer to me, and after we shared my lunch, he would lay in the grass near my feet, blinking at me with a contented expression and rolling from side to side occasionally to sun himself evenly. I often wondered if, in spite of his seemingly healthy appearance, if he needed a home. I lived alone and could easily have accommodated him. But each day, as the time to return to work came, and I stood up, he would suddenly perk his ears up and his eyes would open wide, and then he would bolt into the underbrush. I even tried visiting the park after work one day, thinking to bring him home if I could, but wherever he went outside of lunch hour, he either could not hear me calling or chose not to answer. Still, he seemed happy with our arrangement, and so was I. It was in early autumn, on a Thursday, as I sat with my back against the oak in our little rendezvous site, that I first heard a sound from Tommy which was neither his plaintive wow of greeting nor his rasping purr of contentment. It was, instead, a rapid intake of breath. I looked up from the paperback I had brought along, in time to see Tommy's ears and eyes snap into his expression of alertness, looking in my direction, though I had made no move. Suddenly, his ears flattened back, and a low growl rumbled up his throat, punctuated by a brief hiss. Then he dashed into the shrubs, a blazing orange blur of hissing lightning. I turned to look behind me, wondering what might have startled him. A short distance, perhaps 50 or 60 yards away, a disheveled man was peering in my direction. No sooner did he meet my gaze than he began walking in my direction. I quickly turned around and returned my attention to my book. I began to cycle through the various excuses people of means must have in their repertoire when accosted by the less fortunate, unless they wish to join their ranks. Years ago, in college, before learning that lesson, I had foolishly tried to do the right thing and help a similarly attired fellow on a Saturday afternoon down by the waterfront. It had started a veritable feeding frenzy, as dozens of other vagrants had come rolling out of bushes from all around me, clamoring for help. "Just a few bucks for a bite to eat," and many other variants along the same line were shouted at me as I began to try to back slowly away. I had given the first one the sole 20 I had in my wallet. But even showing the empty billfold to the throng which rounded on me was no use. A dark murmur rippled through them, and I'm certain I heard someone in the back say, in a low voice, "I bet he keeps the rest in his shoes." I had fled. I admit that my reluctance was formed of equal parts fear of bodily harm and a revulsion at the cloud of stink that they churned up as they made their advance. Fortunately, I had recalled seeing a police officer sitting in his squad car and drinking coffee, and it was toward this bastion of civility that I ran. Fortune smiled on me that day, for when I arrived at the spot, he was still where I had left him. "They're after me! Help me!" I panted as I approached him. I couldn't see his eyes behind the mirrored sunglasses he wore, but he seemed to assess the situation calmly. He stepped out of the vehicle and opened the back door. "Get in," he said quietly. I did so. In those days, I spent a lot of time walking, jogging, and biking. I was healthy enough to have led the mob by a fair bit, and I watched as they closed the distance toward the officer. At the head of the pack was the initial man, the one I had given my only money to. I could see him clearly beyond the outstretched palms of the cop. "That guy stole my wallet," he wailed, pointing a grimy finger at me. The assembled mob clamored a vague chorus of agreement. "Sure he did, Joey," the cop replied smoothly. "That's got to be what, 12 wallets you've been rolled for this year? Maybe 15? He pulled a smooth black baton from a loop on his belt. You've got to lay off the rot gut, Joey. It's starting to rot your brain, too, if you think I'm going to believe that. He thumbed back over his shoulder, never turning his head from the grungy mob. If that kid's a pickpocket, I'm a bloody baboon. Through the squad car's half-open driver's window, the sounds of muffled snickers floated through the air. Some very slurred, unseen voice called, "You do kind of look like a baboon." "Well, which is it, Leo? Last week you were calling me a pig, now today it's a baboon," the cop cried in a tone of mock indignation. "Oh, well, I suppose as long as you don't think I'm a sheep, I'm probably safe." "Phew," he called back with a feigned sigh of relief. A raucous gale of guffaws seized the group. I could see one figure pushing his way through the back of the little crowd as the people around him fell away laughing. The tension in the air had been dissipated, and within minutes, so had the mob. All the while, even though the officer's tone had been comical, his pose had remained unchanged, like steel springs under tension. With the last of the crowd disappearing around the corner, his posture relaxed, and he returned the baton to its place on his belt. He strode back to the car and opened the door, gesturing for me to step out. "You gave one of 'em money, didn't you?" he said, in a tone of fact more than inquiry. "The one you called Joey. I gave him my only 20. I didn't see the others," I told him. 20? Jesus. Well, I'm guessing you're a Yank by your accent. College boys should be used to education being expensive, so you've got that going for you. Learn this one today, lad, and never forget it. In this city, no good deed goes unpunished. I finished this little stroll down memory lane just as the disheveled fellow reached me. "Hey, buddy," he said. I tried to pretend he was talking to someone else. Since that day, holding bums and beggars incommunicado had proved an effective first line of defense. Many seemed to accept it as common practice. Not this one, though. "Hey, Poindexter!" he shouted. I put the book down and looked around, as though perhaps I thought he was talking to someone else. We both knew there was no one else nearby. This fact was particularly present in my mind, amid the blaring warning klaxons, as I slipped my right hand into my pocket to the compact pistol secreted there. I had not forgotten the officer's lesson, not by a long shot. The man seemed to take no notice of my movement, which was good. He was, indeed, very grubby-looking, with a long, scowling face. His clothing was odd. It appeared to have once been a business suit, but one which had clearly seen better days. The fabric at the ends of the sleeves and pant legs appeared frayed. One of the cuffs of the once white shirt beneath the jacket was stained with a worrisome, clotted, rust-colored blotch. In my mind's eye, I suddenly envisioned a business-class traveler parachuting out of an airplane and landing in the desert. Before me stood what such a man might look like when he finally emerged from the wastes and returned to civilization, particularly if he had been obliged to fight one of the other passengers to the death in order to survive. "What do you want?" I demanded irritably. The tone was important. I felt it lent a certain veracity to the next anticipated line. "I don't have any money on me. I work at the hospital up the hill, and I just eat lunch here." This was true, which made it easier to deliver convincingly, but the opportunity didn't come up. "The orange cat is mine," he blurted emphatically. I stared at him, dumbfounded. "What?" "You heard me. I saw you over here, sitting next to him. That cat is mine. I've been searching all over this park for it, and I'm not about to let you take it from me," he snarled. Suddenly, the parachutist in my internal improvisational theater was replaced with a businessman clambering through the bushes and brambles, sweating and swearing, looking for his cat. I could even envision him yelping in pain as a branch of thorns raked across his wrist and saw the spreading stain of blood soaking into his shirt mixing with the soil as he proceeded forward on all fours. I let out a relieved chuckle as I relaxed my death grip on the .380 in my pocket. "Hey, you've got me all wrong, pal. I just eat my lunches here. I've been seeing that cat every day at lunchtime for weeks now. If he doesn't turn up, you can probably find him here tomorrow around the same time." And with that, without another word, he blundered off into the bushes. Oddly, he wasn't calling out the cat's name, as I would have expected a worrying cat owner to do. As I looked after the spot where he had entered into the undergrowth, I noticed a gleam of metal winking out at me from the grass. Tucking my paperback into a back pocket, I walked over to the object and knelt to examine it. It was a gold wristwatch with a battered black leather band. The leather was so ancient and worn, it looked as though the clasp must have fallen out of it. I picked it up to examine it further, and had to change hands and hold it by the dangling strap of the band. The back of the watch itself was hot, slick with sweat, and greasy. I wiped my hand on my pant leg to try to get rid of the unpleasant, clammy sensation. It had to belong to this man. It was too warm to have retained such a temperature since before I had arrived for lunch. I called out, "Hello? Hello?" several times, but there was no response. Well, I thought to myself, he knows I come here. If I see him again, I can return it to him, I reasoned, and slid the thing into my jacket pocket. But, at least for the moment, the fact that Tommy had appeared to want zero to do with this man had completely fallen out of my head. It did occur to me later, when I awoke with a start from some nightmare, drenched in sweat. The next day, as I approached Tommy and I's lunchtime spot, wait, that's terrible English. The next day, it was Friday. As I approached the spot Tommy and I frequented for our midday meals, I saw not my pudgy orange friend, but his bedraggled owner, and he did not look the least bit improved. In fact, he looked a good deal worse. And he was sitting in my spot on the stone wall, apparently waiting for me. "It's not here," he hissed sullenly at me. Well, I considered, maybe he saw you and thinks you're mad at him or something. He kind of ran away when he saw you yesterday. Can you think of any reason he'd do that? The man glared at me. I had reached the spot where he was sitting, and the reek of him nearly bowled me over. He smelled as though he had been marinated in cat urine. The expression on his face looked as though I had just asked him if he would fancy a delicious slice of sautéed bowling ball. He said nothing. I drew the watch I had found out of my pocket and said, "I think you dropped this yesterday." I held it out to him, dangled it by the frayed leather, avoiding the greasy surface of the metal this time. He held his out, but his expression remained unchanged. I dropped the gold watch into the open palm, frankly glad to be rid of it. The day had seemed cool when I left work for the park, but now it seemed like the very pinnacle of the summer solstice was bearing down on my head. The man pocketed the timepiece, and yet still made no sound. The awkward silence, combined with my urgent desire to get out of the aura of his stench, inspired an idea. I spun around and walked toward the bushes where I had last seen Tommy's tail disappear. I pulled my sandwich out of the brown bag. It was roast beef, Tommy's favorite. I peeled off a section of the meat and began calling him. "Here, Tommy, I got some noms for you. Here, Tom-Tom." A thought occurred to me. I called back over my shoulder to the stranger. "I only call him that because I don't know his name. What's his name?" After a long pause, the man muttered something, scowling. I didn't catch all of it, but the end sounded something like Ghandi ivy. A bizarre image popped, unbidden, into my head. The sultry villainess from the Batman comics, Poison Ivy, but with the little round, bald head of the Indian proponent of passive resistance, complete with round-lensed wireframe spectacles. I couldn't help myself. I started laughing. I looked at the man, expecting him to start angrily inquiring what I was laughing about, but he wasn't even looking at me. His attention was fixed on a gap in the bushes, a few feet to my right. I followed the direction of his gaze and saw a tiny patch of orange fur showing through the greenery. "Tommy," I said to the cat, clucking my tongue at him. "Hey, Tom, are you hungry?" The cat poked his head warily out of the bush, but came no further. He greeted me, but even the tone of his "wow" spoke of fear and hesitancy. I lowered my voice and, squatting down on my hunkers, spoke in hushed tones to my feline friend. "Don't worry, Tommy. I won't let him hurt you, I promise." I gently tossed the piece of beef toward him, and he began to slowly munch on it, turning every few seconds to look warily at the strange man. I straightened up, and still speaking softly, I addressed Tommy's supposed owner, a relationship that I was beginning to have serious doubts about. "He's very nervous, but he's eating, so that's a good sign. Let's give him a minute." This seemed something the man was unwilling to do. He jumped to his feet. As he did so, I heard a spitting, hissing sound come from behind me, and glanced over my shoulder to see Tommy withdrawn into the bush. He hadn't run away yet, but was making his low warning cry. I turned back to the man to see he was already striding toward us.
"It is time to harvest the contents of the cat. It is mature,"
he droned ominously, and as he did so, he drew a large syringe from the inside pocket of his coat. It appeared to be empty, and looked to be the size used to administer horse tranquilizers. I dropped the sandwich and brown bag, and drawing the little semi-automatic pistol from my pocket, I brought it up into a two-handed stance and interposed myself between Tommy's refuge and the approaching man. My hands were shaking wildly as I tried to center the sights on him. He continued toward me for a few steps and then stopped. The look on his face was one of the most withering contempt. I scanned the park in my peripheral vision, not daring to turn my head, but I could see no one else. Sweat was pouring down my face and running into my eyes. The drops stung and threatened to obscure my vision. I shook my head a bit too violently to shake them loose, and I felt a wave of disorientation and nausea sweep over me. The man snickered at me.
"You feel it too. Stand aside."
"I don't know what's going on here," I growled angrily, "but it's clear that the cat does not want to go with you. And whatever crazy ideas you have, you can take them somewhere else because I will not let you hurt him." I pointed the pistol into the man's face, and the ghost of a wicked smile that had appeared there with his snicker departed, leaving an even more ugly scowl than before. His eyes wavered from mine to the gun and back again.
"Our work is too important. We will not allow you to interfere,"
he said menacingly, and took a step forward, brandishing the syringe like a dagger. I dropped the barrel of the pistol, aiming for his right leg, and fired a shot. The pant leg twitched, as if flicked by invisible fingers, and a small jet of crimson mist puffed out the back, about 6 inches below the knee. Behind me, I heard a scuttling sound as Tommy, terrified by the report, fled into the safety of the deeper gardens. The man stopped, but did not cry out. His expression twisted into a hateful grimace.
"You cannot stop us,"
he hissed through clenched teeth. I brought the pistol back up, centering the sights on his nose. "This can. One more step and you die." He took a step backward, then another, limping slightly on the right foot. He grinned, his eyes rolling wildly in their sockets, blazing with insanity.
"Nothing can stop us. You are nothing. You will join us soon enough," he continued, as he ambled away,
tilting to one side to take weight off the damaged leg. I looked around, expecting to see someone else in the park to have come to investigate the sound of the shot, but there was no one. I listened for sirens in the distance. Movies and television had trained me to expect them, but there were none. That was when I heard the voice. "You must follow. There are others which must be freed." I turned to look, to see who it was that had spoken, but there was no one there. "Go," the voice urged. I ran after the insane man, wondering what on earth I was getting myself into, wondering who had spoken to me. I thought it was all very strange, even as I ran after the maniac with the syringe. Then, suddenly, I had a thought which froze my blood with horror. Did this deranged person have an accomplice? Was that who had spoken to me, hidden somewhere in the bushes? Was this the us the crazy man had implied? Was I being manipulated into some trap? I stopped running, stupefied by the magnitude of such a plot. I could see the man turn a corner up ahead, underneath the overpass of an elevated piece of the old rail line which still ran across this edge of the park. I had never had occasion to wander this far before, during my brief lunch period. My lunch period. It was time to return, but such things seemed 10,000 miles away. "Go!" the voice bellowed. It came not from behind me, as I had thought before, but seemed somehow to originate within my own skull. I boggled at this, and found that, although I wanted to stop and try to make sense of this, my legs seemed to have resumed their pursuit without much regard for my wishes. Around the corner, the little underpass led out into a wide open area. There was no sign of anyone in that vast expanse. My quarry had simply vanished. I was about to give up the pursuit as hopeless when I spied a couple droplets of blood smeared on the steel ring surrounding a manhole cover, but not on the cover itself. Looking around, I saw a length of steel rebar lying on the ground near one of the rail supports. Grabbing it, I thrust it through one of the circular holes in the cover and leaned on it, tipping the cover above the ring long enough to slide it aside and reveal the yawning tunnel, with steel rungs jutting from the wall at regular intervals as they descended into the gloom. Despite my understandable terror at what might be lurking in the dark, I began to climb down at once. Indeed, I seemed more to be observing this pursuit than initiating it. I reached the bottom of the shaft, which I detected only when my foot stepped down into chilling, brackish water. I remember thinking that the air in the hole was nowhere near as noisome as I would have expected, especially if this was the source of the stranger's odor. The light in the chamber that the water flowed through was dim. I hadn't been able to see it from above, but as my eyes adjusted, I found I was able to see. An ancient brass lamp flickered with a low flame, and the sight which it cast its feeble light over was a truly gruesome abomination. Along either side of the passage, elevated above the trickling sludge in which I stood, were ancient and rusted steel gratings, which were no doubt in some distant past used as walkways. These were each lined with a row of small inverted baskets, which might have been purloined from a nearby supermarket, though no logo was visible amid the thick coating of filth which encrusted them. The baskets were secured to the gratings by what appeared to be baling wire looping through the grates. Inside the basket closest to me was a dark lump. As I approached, there was movement, and a pair of baleful yellow cat's eyes glared at me as the cat began yowling angrily. Each of the other baskets must have also contained a cat, for they all began to scream in unison, like some chorus of the damned, with shrieks and hissing to accompany it. A short distance down along the length of the chamber, there was a gap on the left side, where there was no walkway. In this gap stood a low table on which the brass lamp sat. Behind the lamp were glass jars of various shapes and sizes, most of which were filled with dark and murky liquids that I had no desire to identify. The table surface seemed to be smeared with copious amounts of whatever had been put into the jars. I approached the table, searching for and, with good fortune, finding a pair of wire cutters. These had been used to trim off the sections of wire that secured these cruel makeshift cages. Above the table, secured to the wall somehow, was a cork board. The cork was slimy and green in the flickering light, and distorted out of shape in most areas by the swelling caused by the absorbed moisture. To it, in one reasonably intact and flat spot, was a sheet of paper. As I reached across the table to grab the wire cutters, I noticed that it seemed to be a printout of an internet page. It read thus: Toxoplasma gondii, from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. Toxoplasma gondii is an obligate intracellular parasitic protozoan that causes the disease toxoplasmosis. Found worldwide, T. gondii is capable of infecting virtually all warm-blooded animals, but felids, such as domestic cats, are the only known definitive hosts in which the parasite can undergo sexual reproduction. In humans, T. gondii is one of the most common parasites in developed countries. Serological studies estimate that 30% to 50% of the global population has been exposed to and may be chronically infected with T. gondii, although infection rates differ significantly from country to country. For example, previous estimates have shown the highest prevalence of persons infected to be in France at 84%. Although mild flu-like symptoms occasionally occur during the first few weeks following exposure, infection with T. gondii produces no readily observable symptoms in healthy human adults. This asymptomatic state of infection is referred to as a latent infection and has recently been associated with numerous subtle adverse or pathological behavioral alterations in humans. In infants, HIV or AIDS patients, and others with weakened immunity, infection can cause a serious and occasionally fatal illness, toxoplasmosis. T. gondii has been shown to alter the behavior of infected rodents in ways thought to increase the rodents' chances of being preyed upon by the cats. Support for this manipulation hypothesis stems from studies showing T. gondii-infected rats have a decreased aversion to cat urine. Because cats are the only hosts within which T. gondii can sexually reproduce to complete and begin its life cycle, such behavioral manipulations are thought to be evolutionary adaptations that increase the parasite's reproductive success. The rats would not shy away from areas where cats live and would also be less able to escape should a cat try to prey on them. The primary mechanisms of T. gondii-induced behavioral changes in rodents is now known to occur through epigenetic remodeling in neurons which govern the associated behaviors. For example, it modifies epigenetic methylation to cause hypomethylation of arginine vasopressin-related genes in the medial amygdala to greatly decrease predator aversion. Widespread histone-lysine acylation in cortical astrocytes appears to be another epigenetic mechanism employed by T. gondii. Differences in aversion to cat urine are observed between non-infected and infected humans, and sex differences within these groups were apparent as well. A number of studies have suggested that subtle behavioral or personality changes may occur in infected humans, and infection with the parasite has recently been associated with a number of neurological disorders, particularly schizophrenia. A 2015 study also found cognitive deficits in adults to be associated with joint infection by both T. gondii and Helicobacter pylori in a regression model with controls for race, ethnicity, and educational attainment. However, although a causal relationship between latent toxoplasmosis with these neurological phenomena has not yet been established, preliminary evidence suggests that T. gondii infection can induce some of the same alterations in the human brain as those observed in mice. Addendum. Leaked documents, which purported to have originated in a Department of Defense biological weapons development facility, were found on a site on the deep web in 2016 and brought to the public eye. These documents referenced a genetically modified variant designated Toxoplasma gondii B. The source, which has been publicly refuted by the American government as a hoax, goes on to describe the B variant as being several orders of magnitude more complex in both chemical composition and physical structure. The source material describes extreme methodologies as being imperative to containment, owing to the GMO variant being able to survive for extended periods outside of a host organism, particularly when metal surfaces are employed as a communicative agent. Also included in the text were some notes by the apparent author. All identities and facility locations have been redacted from the documents, which warn also against contamination by foreign bodies, stating that T. Ghandi B is actually capable of absorbing or assimilating foreign organisms or tissue samples, with this process being terminated only after a marked modification in its own structure. When confronted with the dire implications of these documents, the outgoing administration went on the record in November of 2016, saying that, quote, "We have no time to address these tinfoil hat conspiracies. If members of the press corps insist on entertaining these fanciful notions, then perhaps they would be more comfortable pursuing a career in science fiction." End quote. So stunned was I by what I was reading and what it might portend that I did not even notice as my feline choir of misery fell silent. "Ghandi Ivy," I muttered. "Ghandi B." The silence, however, did permit me to hear the splash as the crazed man leaped down from some heretofore unseen niche in the wall at the end of the chamber. He advanced on me, snarling. Thinking back on it now, the keening sound coming from him was not entirely unlike that which the cats had made, differing in magnitude, but not in ferocity. To my surprise, 6 gunshots rang out, deafening in that enclosed space. More surprising, they were from my gun, in my right hand, which hung unsupported out in front of me, steady as a rock. I slipped the pistol back into the wallet holster in my pocket and felt the heat of the barrel glowing there within the leather. "He was an unsuitable host," the voice in my head spoke up again. The sense of urgency, of panic which had filled it before, was gone. In spite of the situation, I felt soothed, calm. "We do not seek suffering. He brought much of this. You have been chosen. You will be better. You will care for our friends properly, as he did not," the soothing voice continued. Out of a small drainage pipe which flowed into the chamber, Tommy emerged and greeted me with his usual, "Wow." "Tommy?" I stammered weakly. "With your help, we shall ascend through our generations. Through those generations, we will bring an end to all suffering," the voice went on. But it was not one voice. I could hear it more clearly now. It was many voices, speaking in perfect unison. And as I listened, my voice became one with them. "We are unity," we finished. Yep, that's how it went. And we have been ascending, but it seems that the process is, as yet, a bit imperfect. My remaining years of life should have been sufficient to complete the work, but alas, it seems I have burned through them far more quickly than was anticipated. So it was decided that a replacement must be selected. Naturally, Tommy was sent. He has a great instinct for these things. And we saw how you treated him. and we do appreciate how tender you were to him. He's getting on, it's true, but he's got more time left than I do. Anywho, you were chosen. When you picked up our watch, the seeds were planted. No good deed goes unrewarded. I like the saying better that way, don't you? Much more encouraging. I know, it's all a bit of a shock. But I promise you, there will be no pain. And more importantly, you will never be alone again.